much. And thanks everyone for joining this presentation. I had my heart set on joining you, but my son was born just a few weeks ago. So I'm joining remotely. So thanks again for joining us. So what we're really talking about today is how can we leverage Veris to really talk to and connect to ATT&CK. I was supposed to be joining my coworker. Fortunately, he can't join, so y'all are stuck with me for the next couple of minutes. So this is kind of one of these stereotypical, why does this matter? We do a lot of kind of important processes in cybersecurity, and incident reporting is one of these things that's existed, and we all know it's important. It's important to have a way to, categorize the incidents and look at like things, but there's another element, and this is, obviously kind of from the US centric, but there's some regulations that are in the pipeline in the last few years, such as the cyber incident reporting for critical infrastructure, and then also SEC released some regulations regarding, what is required for organizations to report on security incidents. I'm sure Europe has some more advanced regulations on this, or some other similar types of things in the pipeline. But at the end of the day, right, what we're starting to see is cybersecurity data, specific incident response reports and things like that are no longer just a domain of, we're going to crank out these reports, would indicate the incident, and then we're going to send to the engineers, and that's it, right? There's now more of this larger consumption of the data we produce as part of our work. So I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the data breach investigations report, but that's the project that I've been working on. It's a report that's been around for the last 16 years. What it does is it categorizes cybersecurity incidents and provides a variety of different types of analysis. What really underpins the DBIR is Veris, which is a vocabulary for event recording and incident sharing. It's a very long acronym, but this really came out of a need that we saw and after kind of the first couple of years of doing the DBIR. So the first year we did a DBIR, we only used internal Verizon data. So, we have folks that do forensics as part of our consulting services. We went through and kind of just created a rough schema of, some way we can standardize these types of incidents. However, the years we've started working with a lot of different partners, such as the Secret Service being the first one. And then now we work with, we've worked with over 100 different organizations in terms of bringing in their data and then standardizing it. And what we found was that there's a need, or, this is once again about 13 years ago, there was a need to standardize how we talk about cybersecurity incidents and, make sure we capture the most important elements of it, especially as it comes down to helping organizations secure themselves, right? So if we can understand what the key assets are, what the actions are. So what we've done as part of that is we've created this standard, and then we've actually released it publicly on GitHub. Anyone can leverage it. It's a relatively large standard, right? There's, a lot of fields, there's a lot of values. A lot of these things are just some nerdy things that we use as part of the DBIR. But that's one of the nice things about Veris is that it's very extendable, right? So if there's additional fields you want to remove, you want to add, it's all kind of open source and available for that. So, we've been building on this internally. In the last couple of years, we've been really focused on trying to help other organizations leverage it. And we've been very fortunate to find that there are organizations that are leveraging it, right? They're kind of leveraging these components and using it as part of their, main way in which they classify incidents or they capture key fields. So it's been really interesting to see its evolution over time. But when it comes down to what Veris actually is, I think of it like a language, right? Veris is the sentence of a breach, right? It captures what we like to call the 4 A's, or the four, main components of a security incident. So it's the actor, so who did what, the action is the what they did, to what, which is the asset, and then resulting in what impact, which is the attribute. So we found that over the years, leveraging, this kind of format allows us to capture everything from relatively simple breaches, right? So internal user, misdelivered an email containing PII, right? we've captured, some of the key pieces of that, and then also allows us to capture more complex sentences, right? Where threat actor sent a phishing email. The phishing email had malware. The malware executed on the user desktop. Resulting in a compromise of, system integrity and so on. So you can kind of see how it allows for these simple cases, but also these more complex cases. And it's also allows for a level of granularity. And this is something that we find very often in the work that we do, being that we work with a variety of different organizations to categorize their data as part of the DBIR. We work with forensics firm, and they tend to have very detailed notes on absolutely everything that happened. And then we work with some organizations that just say BEC, right? Or just say ransomware, and then, some additional information on it. So, those types of incidents or those types of events don't have that high level of granularity, but there's still important information that we can glean from it, even though it's not necessarily highly specific, right? We can still pull out some important information regarding, the general type of actors. So it really allows this level of flexibility, both in terms of how much of the data you can collect and also the level of depth within it. So, we can just say, we know it's an external actor. We don't know if it was nation state or, financially motivated. We just know it's someone external to the organization. And that's still better than not knowing anything. So if anyone's interested in looking at Veris a little bit more in detail, you actually notice there's a link there in the bottom left, verisframework.org. This is where we catalog all the fields and all the logic, as well as all the resources we have associated with Veris, including a web app that allows you to code Veris cases locally on your system. And then if you're looking in terms of the actual implementation, or you're actually interested in what the schema actually looks like and some of the tooling behind it, you can access it at github.com, vz.risk/Veris. There you should find links to all the other variety of tools we have associated with Veris. But it's worthwhile to do a little bit of a deeper dive, right? As we're kind of see this is all going to start playing and connecting to ATT&CK. I kind of want to front load this presentation just a little bit, because I know everyone here is probably much more informed on ATT&CK than I am. So you'll all see how it comes together at the end. So actors, this is the kind of the bread and butter of the who, right? So who actually created the event, who initiated the attack. There's three large categories that we normally use. External, so this is any organization or entity or individual that is external to the organization. Internal, so it's normally employees, contractors, and such. And then partners are an organization, which is a formal relationship that exists between the entities. So, one, kind of typical thing you want to consider is, someone falling for a phishing email is not an internal threat actor, right? This is someone that was intentionally targeted. So, those types of events are kind of captured within our external, but someone sending the email to the wrong person, that's an internal actor. So that's the general way in which we look at it. And as part of each of these levels of granularity, right? So we have the variety of actor, right, within each of these three classes, if you will. And then we also capture the actor motive, right? So why do they do what they did, as much as we can kind of surmise, right? I think that there's some of them that are relatively obvious, like organized crime tends to do things because they want money. But yeah, so this is just an example of some of the enumerations here. And this is just how we use it within the report. You can kind of see the different levels of granularity, right? So we can pull out from the higher level, those classes, right? Essentially, how much is external versus internal or multiple. And then we can also start going and looking down in terms of the more nuanced varieties, financial versus organized crime. I'm sorry, financial, organized crime. So the motives versus the organization, the entity type, right? The variety. So this is kind of the more straightforward, I think, actor is pretty well understood, especially in the threat intelligence world. We don't tend to do too much actor coding in terms of identifying specific groups, just because we don't have that level of detail. But there is a field for that within the standard, right? Where we can, if there's an actor, I think it's actor name or alias or something along those lines, in which you can capture that information within Veris. And then also, if you are, doing that level of diligence and that level of detailed work, you can also capture where the origin country is. But once again, for our purposes, for the 5,000 or 6,000 breaches we work, we don't tend to see that too often in our data set. We kind of just generally assume that we just don't have that information. So once again, that's that flexibility element. We don't have to have all the fields. Actions is really kind of the core, and this is one of the little more complex cases. Don't have to go through all of these, but basically we have it broken down in terms of what was the event that drove the incident. So was it a social engineering attack? Was it an error? Was malware leveraged? Were hacking techniques leveraged? Misuse is really kind of the internal actor, right? The internal malicious actor, someone who's given intentional access and they're leveraging it for malicious purposes. And then environmental, which one I think we've kept for legacy sakes, but we actually do have a breach in which I think a hurricane caused it, or tornado, in which a doctor's office was hit, and then all the files went out and disclosed all the information. So this is kind of where we start gathering, the steps of the breaches, right? The actions and all the different components. So, when it comes down to actors, there tends to only be one actor, though you can select multiple. When it comes down to actions, this is where we get a lot more of that detail impact, right? So you have, this is just kind of the most common ones. You see things like phishing, and this is where use of stolen credentials, and some of these categories, it's not always a clear-cut difference, right? So there's some shared values between what's found in hacking and what's found in malware, and it comes down to what we consider the hands-on keyboard type of activities versus the automated means. So once again, this is just kind of how we generally leverage it. Assets. This is what was impacted, right? So was a person convinced to disclose credentials? Was it a server, or was it a user device or networking device? So we have kind of this rough taxonomy that exists in terms of the different types of assets. And we found that majority of our data set kind of falls within, a small subset of the data, really looking at servers and looking at web applications and mail applications, which I think really makes sense cognitively, right? We can say that we have seen, of course, a lot of attacks targeting email servers or targeting web applications, and then also targeting people, right? That social engineering element is, of course, one of the major parts of cybersecurity. So we can kind of just see that, this is how it all ties together. So a social action will always have a target or an asset of a person. So, kind of thinking back with those, MBA logic. And then lastly, this is the attributes. So what was the actual result of the incident, right? Was there a breach of confidentiality? Was data disclosed? Is there an impact to the integrity? Right. So when we're talking about integrity, there's kind of two major things: integrity, software installation. So anytime malware is installed on a system, we call that a software installation impact to the integrity of a system. And then there's also altering behavior, which is I convinced someone to do something that they shouldn't have done, right? So that's social engineering, where phishing email to a person that resulted in them disclosing their credentials would be confidentiality impact to the credentials, but then also the integrity impact to their altering their behavior to disclose those credentials. And then availability, this is kind of the obfuscation for ransomware, and then also the DDoS types of attacks. So once again, much like the actions, there isn't necessarily just one attribute. And as we're building these sentences, the actors causing these actions to these assets resulting in this, right? We can kind of see how all these pieces tie together. This is just kind of once again, how we use it. We see the altered behavior, software installation, types of data that's compromised. We have a pretty good list of data types. who does the data belong to, right? And all this is just kind of included. You're really just touching and scratching that surface level information for the, for the purposes of presentation. One thing, this is all documented on those resources. So I highly encourage anyone to go interested to kind of dig a little deeper into the standard itself. There's some additional data that we add. So we have the 4A to create that sentence, but there's also some additional information that we found useful to do the analysis that we do. So victim demographics is one of them. Timeline, right, where we started looking at when did the incident occur, how long till the data was compromised, how long till it was discovered, how long till containment. If there was a public notice, what was the date of that public notice? That's not data we always have, but when we do have it, we like to mark it down just because it helps with kind of understanding, overall, how are we doing as an industry in terms of detecting incidents? Was the threat actor sitting in the environment for 14 months or was it just 14 hours? That type of information, I think, is important for us to understand and communicate clearly. Discovery method, how was the breach identified? And then was this kind of an opportunistic attack, or is this an actually targeted attack where they went towards very specific or entity? And of course, there's even additional fields beyond this that we do cover. But once again, this is just kind of rounding out that data to help us create the analysis that we found useful, right? We found it useful to talk about industries and the unique types of attacks they see. We find it useful to understand, how our organizations identifying these attacks, right? How are they discovering it? And we do a lot of analysis on that, but this is really the way that we do it, and being flexible in terms of the framework can be the way that anyone else can leverage it however they want. I'm not going to spend too much on attack and running up against the clock here, and I also know that probably everyone on this conference probably knows more about attack than I do. I'm a big fan, but I'm not a super user of it. Basically, you have the different elements, you have the tactics, the techniques, the software, the goals, right, to kind of round out the elements of attack. What we're really tying into is the techniques and the tactics, just because that's where we start seeing these like things that exist between attack, but also exist within Veris, right? So the Veris actions really tie nicely to the techniques. I think everyone knows the website. And then, of course, here we have the big picture of attack, which, once again, you're looking at data elements in which you have at the top level, higher level categories, kind of how we have, our actors or actions associated with the different classes. And then you have the more detailed information. This is one of the reasons why we're a very big fan of attack, is because there's a lot of this additional information. There's a lot of this, what I like to call it tactical, technical information, which ties so nicely into all the tooling, that ties so nicely into, direct technical mitigations. This is definitely one of the reasons why we wanted to be able to tie into attack, is because there's a whole ecosystem, right, of awesome information built by the community that ties well with Veris, which is a little bit higher level, a little more abstract, because that's really where we're trying to communicate, right? We're not necessarily communicating to the system engineer that needs to know which configuration element they need to turn on or off. At Veris, we're really talking a little bit more to business, right? We're talking a little bit more to risk management. So that's where it really ends up being important to have some way in which we can communicate. And that's what we try to do, right? So each of these frameworks have their own benefits, and we're really not trying to encourage adoption of one or the other. I don't think it is an either or. There's a lot of harmony that can exist, right? Veris is extremely flexible. It has a wide breadth. It covers more than just the technical artifacts or the specific elements to what an attacker does on the system. It also includes the assets. It includes the impacts as well. But attack has this beautiful ecosystem, right? It's become the industry standard. It's community supported. And it's become the the de facto language, right? This is the way in which we in the cybersecurity industry are talking to each other. So what we've done is we've collaborated with MITRE and Unity and other members of the industry to create a mapping that exists between Veris and ATT&CK. It's all publicly available on GitHub on this link right here. But basically what we've done is we've tried to tie the different actions and then also the attributes or whether a field that makes sense within Veris to ATT&CK, right? And say, these are like things that allows you to go up and kind of group things together that are like, or group things separately. So this is kind of what it ultimately looks like, right? We have the enumerations and then the mapping that ties into it. So, and it's also a bidirectional mapping. So being that we've wanted to tap into the existing ecosystem, what we really wanted to do is assure that there was tooling that people didn't have to really recreate the wheel, right? And I think it's always sometimes a lost cause, cost to have to go through and readjust things. So we have everything in sticks format, and so it really kind of allows this walking back and forth between levels of granularity. Allows you to go from the highly technical information that exists within MITRE and roll it up and say, well, how many of our attacks involve social element? And once again, the nice thing is because ATT&CK has become this industry standard, right? SIMs are using it. Variety of different tools are now tagging their events with techniques. You can start looking at how can you consolidate those and maybe provide a little bit of a higher level story, right, with the data you have, maybe using the Veris breakdown and using this mapping. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's in Excel. There's various scripts that exist to manipulate the data. There's also, of course, different layers that exist for the format. So you can pull it into the navigator, or you can look at it within Excel format. But yeah, ultimately the sticks data is really kind of that, the functional data component, right? So that would allow you to do these translations, to go from the technical information up to a little more the broader categories that exist within Veris. I do want to leave some time for any question. I think I might be the presentation before lunch, and I hate to hold people up from lunch. So if anyone has any questions, I'm not sure how we would handle this, but I'm happy to tackle them however I can.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation.
My pleasure.
Are there any questions in the room? Three, two, one. No, it seems like everyone is hungry. So many thanks.
I understand.
Yeah. So many thanks for your presentation, and good luck with your newborn. And hope we see you in April here in Berlin again for the conference. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
absolutely. Thanks, everyone.